You're stuck in a cabin with no clue how or why you got there. A pair of eyes peers at you across the table, the person they belong to urging, no, demanding that you play a game with him. A deck builder with cards that seem to almost react to you, speaking to a horrifying fate if you misplay a hand, in an unsettling adventure story told by the monster shrouded in darkness across from you. And the most terrifying question of all, how did such an amazingly atmospheric game that captured so many people during its demo end up self-destructing so spectacularly once people got their hands on the actual game? Spoiler warning for those who still wish to discover the plot on their own, we are picking nearly the entire thing apart here. So, let's get into it. Inscryption was a game announced in June of 2021, a roguelike deck-building game developed by Daniel Mullins Games and published by Devolver Digital. The demo of the game itself created a massive interest, but that started to stumble after the game itself was released. The Inscryption demo covers a chunk of its first act, leading the player through a card-based game with unknown but implied to be very unpleasant consequences for a loss. I distinctly remember that even seeing a hint of the demo was enough to make me throw my money at the game as soon as I had the funds. It was perfect. The atmosphere was chilling, the game was just hard enough that you had to really take time to learn it, make your mistakes, come back. Everything about it was so well done. Cards would shiver and shake when you had to make choices that might end poorly for them. Some of them spoke in riddles, implying they know far more than you do about the situation you're in. And the villain, Leshy as you later learn his name is, brings such earnestness to his storytelling, using masks and personalities to portray his fun little characters. He ends up being a fascinating murderer to be. All the while, you're allowed to sift through various puzzles, bits, and bobs in the cabin, and if you take too long to figure something out, you get hints and weird dreamlike sequences that tell you the next thing to do, giving you plenty to mess with and explore if you need to break from the card game, but in the end, it's always sit back down with the monster across from you. The horror is heightened when your second candle snuffs out and you find what happens when his giant hands reach out across the table for you. You get the chance to memorialize yourself, putting together yourself as one of the cards to be played in the game. His camera snaps to take your photo for the card and you're gone, murdered by the man you were just playing a game with moments ago. And then you try again, navigating a changed up map and doing your best to learn from old mistakes, fighting your way through difficult bosses and enough RNG to make things spicy and fresh. It's so good, with one major flaw in my opinion, which is the fourth wall breaks. You see at the beginning of the game, there's a voice line that's meant to show that it's not exactly you playing the game, it's a recording maybe of someone else playing it. It is, though, easy to ignore once the game sucks you in. The problem is this guy keeps talking at random intervals later on. Now, this will require a bit of an explanation at what makes good horror, at least from my perspective. One of the key, the biggest, the most important parts of good horror is immersion. The best way for horror to click is to lower the perceived boundary between us and our character when we're gaming. The more so we're able to feel like we're in the same situation as them, the more horror works as a frightening, intense experience. This is the reason I think intense difficulty can often be, I said often, Mr. Fear and Hunger, detrimental to horror as a whole, as having to stop playing and then get back into a reload helps build that wall between player and character as a whole. Inscryption itself seems to even acknowledge this, as the deaths are very much an in-game thing. It's not a reload when you die as much as a new person playing the game. The more we're able to connect with a character and feel the tension they feel, the stronger the scare. And this is why horror is a careful, delicate balance between making a person terrified that they might lose and avoiding resetting as much as possible. But the last thing you want to do in a horror game is just completely jar the player out of the game if your intent is to actually make horror. So, for one example out of many, being in the middle of one of the difficult bosses in the game and getting this
Die already!
reminds the player that they aren't the person behind the chair. They're playing someone playing the video game at best, or portraying what is supposed to be someone else playing the game at worst. Either way, that's my biggest complaint from the first section of the game, that and the story told through various recordings after you beat the final boss for the first time. Again, not a bad way of storytelling in general, but not the best for a game that's so far based on RNG and adventure. Not the best for a game like this is going to become a theme here. See, I have pretty powerful feelings on demos. I think they're a demonstration of gameplay, of tone, here's a bite-sized piece of what to expect from our game. Something to get people intrigued and show them that there's something they'll enjoy playing out there. Far too often, though, it's a showcase of the best part of the game, squeezed into the opening so the rest of the game is underwhelming by comparison. Not a fan, Resident Evil Village, not a fan. What you did to Vampire Mom? Crimes. This feels very much like what was done here. The horror, immaculate. The game, intense. Just difficult enough to require you to have to puzzle out some abilities and panic when a new boss throws a curveball at you, but not much worse than that unless you're very good. Then you have a bit of a load to bear. But then Act 2 begins, and the genre changes out of horror completely. I understand it feeds into the larger narrative, but for me it's not about story merits in a vacuum at this juncture. It moves to an older style deck builder game, but without rules that are necessarily easy to understand, with limited guidance and an absolute middle finger to every bit of atmosphere that the game has worked hard to establish up until this point. I'll get to the merits of what I'm going to complain about in a bit, but in my opinion, this section was far and above the weakest part of the game. A slog to portray a point that everything isn't quite as it seems, and that this game began as a normal RPG. But that's the thing, the stakes have just been shattered. The character in the game you're controlling is in no danger, and only by playing through enough of the game do you see the danger the guy filming the videos is in, which isn't particularly gripping or intense when you need to unlock the videos after going through hours of gameplay that's really hard to understand or grasp. Then, finally, you get to Act 3. Now, I loved this section a lot on my second playthrough when I knew what to expect from the game. The subtle references to the other parts of it, implying that no matter what person has the lead, that some things are constants. PO3's core conceit about messing with your actual computer. The very concept of the Great Transcendence being the scheme for online immortality. It's brilliant, but it's not what the game promised. It's confusing, jarring, and if you love the game based on the demo, but this new style of gameplay just isn't fun to you, well, you're right out of luck. And it's a long way to the finish line at this point, a massive trek to find what point of the game is. Even though it's clear that there was a lot of effort put into the ending parts of the game, it's long. Remember how I praised this game's first act for making dying feel like an in-game event? It also empowered you, letting you have stronger and stronger cards to push forward with. This section doesn't have that. You lose and you're brought back to the last checkpoint and have to fight to get your money back. And if you're struggling with your current deck, rip. There isn't much in the way to improve what you got. After this, the game wraps, and the ending's pretty good story-wise. Going into what it means to end immortality and eternal conflict, it's really well done, which is more frustrating than anything else, because on the first play, it's been exhausting to get here. It's no longer a catharsis to an enjoyable game, but a need to see some ending to it all, which doesn't really make for a way to truly enjoy what the designer created. It's all expectation. This game would be incredible if it was as advertised. In replaying it for this video, I found it to be loads more fun than my first playthrough, because I knew what to expect, and I was able to really get into it for the first time. Until then, though, it was just a game that left a sour taste in my mouth. My plea to game designers is, once again, manage expectations. Display your game as it really is, not just the best part of it. Otherwise, this is what happens. A game can be good, but if the first part of it is excellent, the rest of it just looks weak by comparison. Funnily enough, Kaycee's mod was announced by the devs in March 2022, which turns the first act into an endless roguelike that increases in difficulty over time. And honestly, huge applause for this. This was an amazing move, letting the people who played the game get what they came for. No notes, beautiful. Honestly, I think this is a huge part of the reason the game now continues to thrive with amazing Steam overall reviews. All in all, it's a good game, and if you haven't played it, I recommend you do. But don't look for a horror game. Be prepped for a surreal mystery with horror elements, and be ready to learn whatever mechanic it's thrown at you with varying levels of context. So, how do you feel? Was this game jarring to you and how much it changed? Did you love the whole ride, start to finish? Let me know below. And if you want to see more rambles, hit me up with a like and subscribe so I can keep doing what I'm doing. And I'll see you all next round after I draw the Eternal Cat.